You're probably not super familiar with this word, adoptionism, and it doesn't mean growing your family. It's an old Christological heresy that tries to explain away Jesus' deity by saying he didn't pre-exist before the incarnation, but was kind of found by God. Adoptionism, a heresy which held that although Jesus was essentially non-divine, he was adopted by the Father, perhaps at his baptism or even at his birth. So why should we care about this heresy today? Well, it's not so much the heresy specifically itself, but it's how people try and address the divinity of Jesus. And we need to know our Bible to understand the divinity of Jesus. John chapter 10, verse 30, New International Version. I and the Father are one. We're going to be reading from the NET version of the Bible, and specifically we're going to be in the book of Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 19, and this is one of Paul's epistles. There is a landmine that we need to talk about before we dig into everything, and different groups have tried to adjust or do away with the divinity of Jesus using this passage. Specifically in verse 15 and verse 18, we see the words, the firstborn, and as opposed to seeing this as a position of authority, they see it as a descriptor to Jesus being a created being. Regardless of which Christological heresy is trying to manipulate this passage towards their belief and the way to address Jesus, the passage speaks for itself. Starting at the top with verse 15, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Verse 16, For all things in heaven and on earth were created by him. All things, whether visible or invisible, whether thrones or dominions, whether principalities or powers, all things were created through him, for him. Verse 17, He himself is before all things, and all things are held together in him. Verse 18, He is the head of the body, the church, as well as the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself may become first in all things. Verse 19, For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in the Son. Verse 20, And through him to reconcile all things to himself by making peace through the blood of his cross, through him, whether things on earth or things in heaven. This passage leaves no doubt about Jesus' pre-existence and also gives us a Trinitarian statement in the end of it. But, it doesn't really matter what verse you pull. Verse 17, For he himself is before all things, and all things are held together in him. Jesus created everything. Jesus had to pre-exist. Jesus couldn't have been magically adopted or found somewhere along the way. Jesus was there co-eternal with the Father from the beginning because everything was created through Jesus. John chapter 1, verse 14, Lexham English Bible. And the Word became flesh and took up residence among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the one and only from the Father, full of grace and truth. So do we really need to worry about this old church heresy popping up again? And the answer is it could happen because it already has. In the 8th century in Spain, in the 12th and 14th centuries, there was a scholastic neo-adoptionist movement, and even here in the United States in the 1800s it popped up. So you need to be prepared because while some of those dates seem like a long time ago, really in the grand scheme of things, that's relatively close, and this idea could come around again, so know your scripture. Ask yourself these questions and then comment down below. What should we do if we hear someone speaking incorrectly about Jesus in our church? How would you share the gospel with a person who believes in adoptionism? How would you use this passage to help someone who is struggling to understand the Holy Trinity? How would you explain the pre-existence of Jesus to a non-believer? Do you like studying the Bible and you want to keep learning more? Then check out this next video and expand your knowledge of the Bible.